Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm trying to hang in there. I feel like it's been full of ups and downs. Um and I'm glad that we're getting a chance to talk it through because there's just been so much going on at once.
Right.
And yeah, starting with the announcement yesterday that Biden picked a running mate. And at first I was like, "Oh, that's very cool. It's Kamala Harris. I like her." And then I started watching all these comments come in, and then I had to leave social media for the rest of the day because I was like so sick of seeing really vicious attacks already from the left and the right. And so I just checked out yesterday. Um, what do you think about it? What was your experience like?
Uh, Emotional, to be honest. We have waited hundreds of years to see a woman of color in the White House. And I think that our country is ready, and she's the change that we need. And I think we can do this. I think we have a lot working against us, but I think we have a lot working for us. And we are at a pivotal time in our country's history. And if we don't work really, really hard to push right now, we're going to miss out on this opportunity. So we
Mm-hmm.
really need to work and fight to make this ticket happen for us.
Mm-hmm. Um, you're in Virginia, right? You're in Prince William County.
Right? A very important county.
Yeah. Most likely, Virginia it's gonna remain blue, right?
Right.
Yeah. I just moved to Pennsylvania from Virginia, and the situation here is very different. Even though Biden grew up in Scranton, there are a lot of people especially Western Pennsylvania, who I think are going to vote for Trump, and having door knocked and done election work here in the past, I know most of the state is actually very conservative for a very specific reason, which has to do with fracking and the energy industry in Pennsylvania, you know. So a lot of people have jobs that are connected to fracking, and they think that Democrats are going to ban fracking. So it's like the coal industry, but it's also the fracking industry. They definitely feel like Republicans are with them and will protect their jobs, and Democrats are going to try to take their jobs away, right? And so I think that it's complicated. So there are a lot of working class people in Pennsylvania who um, voted for Trump in 2016 because of the jobs issue. And I think they may vote for him again. Even though so many people immediately around me, like in suburbs of Pittsburgh and of course suburbs of Philadelphia, and then in those cities, we're always going to vote Democratic. But the rest of the state, I think people are genuinely worried about their jobs. And I think that's one thing that I wish that Democrats would spend more time doing, is to talk about jobs, like how to create jobs, and to really help the economies, local economies of some of these places that have been really deteriorating for generations now. So I think that's where a lot of voters are. They're worried about jobs and worried about whether or not they're going to be able to feed their kids and so on. And they feel like Democrats are too focused on identity politics, and too focused on issues that don't immediately concern them, like reproductive rights, for instance. Like they don't feel like that immediately concerns them so much. Of course, there are always going to be like single issue pro-life voters, but I would say like majority of voters that I have met in battleground states are just more focused on the economy and and jobs. And so if you go into communities where there literally are no jobs, and then you try to talk to them about elections, it's really difficult because they're very skeptical about your pitch. Like, where's the beef? Like, where are the jobs?
Right.
So yes, I just feel we have to kind of, for me, I feel like that's something we have to really wrestle with, and that I want us to do more of. I would like Biden and Harris to spend more time talking about that, especially right now, since so many people have lost jobs and their health care is tied to those jobs.
So
And yeah.
how do you feel about Trump giving the tax relief now, right before the election? Do you feel that that is appealing to those scared voters specifically, and kind of keeping them in his grasp?
Yeah, I think they see him as a strong leader who would get things done. So cut through all the BS and we'll get things done. That's, I think, how a lot of supporters and maybe even swing voters will see it. So I think it was kind of a genius move. I don't know if he coordinated with McConnell, but probably they did coordinate that so that there would be a stalemate in Congress and it would look like he's saving people with the executive order. I don't know how constitutional it is, but he's done so many things that are legally dubious, and he keeps getting away with it.
Right.
And so I guess I feel more worried than anything, and I don't feel aligned with a lot of people who feel so optimistic, like, oh, look at the polls, Biden is doing so well in battleground states, and just kind of have this attitude that we're going to win, we're winning, we're going to win. And I don't think it's going to be that easy. What do you think?
I think that if we had to run a marathon, it would be very difficult, but we only have to sprint. And we are so close. And we have everything in our favor. So I think we can do it. We have a nation that's ready for change. We have a president who's made a lot of gross errors. We have people that are angry, that are hurting. We have a cultural shift and awakening. We have so many things that we did not have a year ago, and we're at the finish line. And so if we can find the motivation to sprint, I think we can do it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess I just want to show you something. So can you see my screen?
I can.
Yeah. So, Republicans are spending a lot of money looking for ways to suppress voting. And that means they're also recruiting 50,000 people to work as poll workers and election judges in 15 key states. And they're going to make it very difficult for people to vote. And as you know, most likely Trump is going to contest the results, right? So I don't feel like the election is going to end on November 3rd. I think we're going to have days after the election counting the ballots and also there might be, most likely there'll be lawsuits.
Right.
And in places like Florida, they're going to try to throw out a bunch of ballots. There might be lots of ballots that are mailed in that never get counted, right? I'm just afraid that they're willing to use these incredibly dirty tactics to suppress the vote, and Democrats are not ready.
Well,
It's going to get really ugly. Yeah.
Well, speaking to the poll workers, I have been a Democratic poll worker, and typically there is also Republican poll worker. And so I think if we know that there's going to be Republican poll workers, then we need to make sure that we're prepared to have Democratic poll workers to balance that, so that we're also represented. And there is rules to abide by at the polls. We are not allowed to interfere at the polls. Like you absolutely are not, or you are to leave. There is a poll chief that is overseeing the whole process. And then there's also poll workers that are also making sure that the poll workers, that we're not interfering in the process at all. We're actually not supposed to be involved. Our hands aren't even allowed to touch anything. And so that's very important. I've sat there while they even made sure that the last piece of paper was out of the box and while they sent in all the votes. But I'm only allowed to look. I'm not allowed to touch. And I think that's really important. If I saw something I didn't like, I could only bring it up, but I couldn't actually do anything. And I think that's also important. But we need to be represented on the same level that the Republicans are represented. So if we see something the Republicans are doing, if they're actually interfering in an unethical way, that we can say something.
Well, the thing is, what I'm seeing is Republicans have had this strategy of recruiting lots of people, right? And during COVID, right? It's tough. Well, it's tough to get people to work as poll workers, period. Right. And it's usually seniors who do that, right. Retired people, seniors. And many of those people are in that very vulnerable group for COVID. And right. So they're not going to show up. They're not going to participate, the usual group, right? So it's going to be probably a whole new group of people. They may or may not be trained properly. Okay. And I feel like we're going to have a lot to do to catch up, because I don't know how many people they've already recruited. And I don't know how many we have recruited. My guess is it's not even right now. And so if you have a bunch of people who don't follow the normal procedures, who are not trained, who are partisan, it can get extremely messy. And I've seen it get messy in some places in the past, And so it just, it's right now, I feel like there could be a real perfect storm, partly because of COVID. So like the things that we relied on in the past, like an honor system, people following protocol and customs, that just may not happen this year.
Right. No.
So I'm just sharing my concerns that I feel like we have to focus on recruiting people.
I agree.
And young people too. We got to recruit young people. So not only do we have to get them to vote, we have to get them to actually staff up.
Right.
And so that is going to take an extraordinary effort to do. And so I feel like we have to be very strategic about how we approach this election, and not feel like, okay, the poll numbers are great, we're going to win. Or that, Trump's going to try to contest it, but he really can't. We've never had somebody like Trump trying to take advantage of all the vulnerabilities in the system.
Right.
because he's a saboteur. He is trying to break the system. And so I just don't think we can take anything for granted. But what I would like to do is like figure out how to recruit people right now, and also to help people vote, because every day I'm hearing something different about mail-in ballots. For
Oh, yeah.
instance, yeah. And so so that's why, as you know, I'm trying to kind of create like a network of people who are become really knowledgeable about the election this year, like the procedural part, but also to really be strategic in how we ask people to volunteer.
Right.
And I'm hearing like way too much about people planning on like civil disobedience if the election is contested. And that may need to happen, but I feel like before we plan on that, we should plan on being at the polls, monitoring it, and make sure that people's votes are being counted, and that people are not being turned away, and that we're not missing millions of ballots, because that has happened in the past. That a lot of mail-in ballots actually don't get counted, and they target young people and people of color, as you know.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so we
Absolutely.
cannot take anything for granted, and I think we really have to focus on protecting that process. And the only way you can do that, I think, right now is to get a lot of people to volunteer. Um, anyway, so that's one worry I have, is just the fact that their strategy is to recruit people at the polling stations to, I think, suppress the vote. Some of the Democratic legal activists and lawyers are actually saying they might try to change the ballot. And I don't know if that's how that really works, but I'm also reading that as well. So I just don't think we can take anything for granted. I feel there's way too much focus on the candidates and not enough on the process. What do you think?
I would not be surprised if the ballot was a problem. So I think that's something that we need to be very mindful of. And so I think it's very, very important that we do have both parties represented at every polling location. I think it's critical to protecting the sanctity of the election process.
But how do we do that? How do we recruit all these young poll workers?
Well, we need to get the information out there. I mean, these articles are important, but people need to know about it. They need to know that there's a potential for tampering at the polls. And honestly, it's not really being talked about. So I don't know just yet, but I think social media is generally how people are getting their information. We're sheltered in right now in a lot of states. And so, and even the states that we're not sheltered in, people are still not really venturing out. And so social media is really the way that we're going to get the information out there. I know local political committees, DNCs, are really how we recruit here in Prince William County to work our polls. And so when it's election time, I get that phone call and I get assigned to a poll. And that's how I know where I need to be. And generally, that's how I get my information. And I think, honestly, DNCs do a really good job of getting information out. But I don't know that that's necessarily the only way we can get this information out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I guess I've been doing all these live streams, because I feel so desperate to get information out and get people to think about just like every step of this process. I mean, the other thing that I'm worried about, I'm going to do another screen share. Sorry, I mean, I wish I could be all excited about this election, but I'm full of worry. It sucks. I wish that I wasn't.
No, we're going to do, I really believe we are going to do fantastic. We are so close. It's just a matter of connecting, across the nation with the right people. And I believe we can do it. Um,
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel there's so much work, and we have to be very careful about how we spend our time, because I think a lot of people are spending time in a way that isn't necessarily going to help us win. A lot of time commenting on social media and obsessing over Trump's tweets and so on. And I don't think that's gonna help us. Like it's mathematical at some level. We gotta figure out how to get people to vote. So this is an article about a group of people. It's a bipartisan group that like really try to game out like what would happen if Trump contests the election. So they had all these high profile people, and it was organized by Rosa Brooks, a professor at Georgetown Law School. And so they had all sorts of people, people who served at the highest level of government in both parties, get together and come out with all these scenarios, like what happens if Trump does this, or what happens if this happens. And what they concluded was that, if Trump decides he just rejects the outcome of the election, and if people protest, he sends in the militarized federal agents that we've been seeing, we could be in a lot of trouble. And so that after reading this, like, I haven't been able to sleep. I swear, I'm like, so this is like my nightmare, and I don't want everyone to be totally freaked out. I don't want to deliver this like I want you to be panicked and scared. I just think we have to be prepared for anything, and we have to build up a resiliency, and we have to understand the strategy. What they want us to do is have these sorts of protests that they could use to show that the left is violent and anarchic.
Right.
And then he's going to create order, because there'll be a lot of people in the middle who will be begging, like, please stop these protests.
Mm-hmm.
They're looting businesses, and they'll see all these video clips on social media of people being violent and criminal. And so then they would applaud Trump coming in with a heavy hand and stopping the protests. And they would say, like, this is the kind of leader we need, someone who can establish law and order, because the left is criminal and they're violent. And so that's the narrative that he's been seeding all along, especially this year. A lot of Republicans and anyone who watches Fox, like, they believe that narrative right now.
Right.
And so I'm just afraid, like, he'll just totally double down on it, and we would just play right into his hand, like just showing up and protesting and having violent standoffs with federal agents. And then he will be the law and order president that would save America.
Yes. In fact, I have some people that are still on my social media so that I can kind of follow their perspective, that see some of the protests that were happening that some of my friends were doing as violent. They thought that there was violent protests happening here, and they were seeing that narrative. And I was trying to tell them, these young people are just out here, demonstrating, but Trump wants us to see it as riots when young people or young people of color are just out there with signs just organizing together. They're reading into that, and that's what he wants us to do. And it's people across the nation see that, and that's what he wants. He really wants that. And then the people that are here, by the nation's capital, watching it in real time, we're appalled. We're appalled that this is the narrative that is being spread across the nation. We're watching peaceful protests. We're watching peaceful protests, and it's violent.
Well, there's that, but also it's very easy to infiltrate the protests. So they always send like agent provocateurs to instigate violence.
And
it's very,
yeah.
So then they can say, oh, these protesters are so violent, and they have videos of it.
Yes, and in fact, we've had it happen here, and watched it in real time, on live videos. We've had that happen with an elected official where they instigated and they tear gassed an elected official here in Northern Virginia area. And I'm sure that you watched that.
Yes.
And so we've had those instances, and these things are being warped and twisted and turned into something that they're not. And little pockets of the country here, we get the real version, and then the rest of the country sees it as something completely different. And then Trump is being hailed as a hero for stopping this, saving the country.
Yeah, exactly. So he has a political story that he's trying to tell, and he just repeats it over and over again. He will find any way to corroborate it, and a lot of it is completely fabricated, but it's effective.
Right.
So that's why I think we have to be very clear about what his strategy is, so that we don't unwittingly help him by playing along with the script that he's written, And so if our reaction right now is like, okay, we get people out to vote, and then we protest the way we've been protesting, that's going to help Trump. I think what we need to do is figure out how to really protect the vote, recruit people to monitor the polling stations, and figure out how we can get people to vote, probably dropping in their absentee ballots, like do a massive organizing around drop-offs. And then there's going to be lawsuits. I also think this is where there should be massive amount of funding going into these things to make sure that we have the ammunition, the legal ammunition to file a lot of lawsuits, because a lot of lawyers are going to be needed to protect the vote. But what I'm afraid of is just it's all very predictable. He's gonna say, I reject the outcome of the election because it was fraudulent. You're gonna have people like DeSantis in Florida say, oh, we had to throw out all of Broward County ballots or Dade County ballots because there's been evidence of tampering. Who knows? He'll come out with some reason, right? And then we're going to protest, and then it's going to get violent, and he's going to just keep using that to make people so desperate for order that they're going to push the Democrats to concede. Anyway, so that's kind of what I feel like is likely to happen right now. And I want us to like really put our heads together so that we don't unwittingly help him, because that's what he wants to see happen. That's kind of what he's scripted, I think. So anyway, I feel like we got to figure out like how to have constructive conversations, so we're not just like so focused on Twitter and so focused on Facebook and not see the bigger picture. Like, okay, there's a whole strategy at play here. that if we had a good understanding of what that strategy is, we would be fighting smarter. We wouldn't spend 5 hours a day arguing with our friends on Facebook, for instance. You know. Anyway, so that's kind of where I am, and I wish that I could just be super optimistic and celebrating Biden choosing Kamala Harris, but I just can't. Anyway, so I'm trying to come out with the plan. I'm trying to figure out who else is working on this and how we can all work together to figure out like the best strategy going forward.
I think I have some ideas that we could talk about.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you know, I have a few ideas to excite young
Mm-hmm.
people to work the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we could do is maybe start kind of throwing around something that we could call it to work the polls. Maybe brand the working the polls, and you know, we can throw around ideas just to kind of get some ideas out there, and maybe we can bring in some more people and start talking about this and get the conversation going. But usually when we get ideas going, if we
Mm-hmm.
give it a name or give it a brand or give it a theme or even design a t-shirt and get it funded, that we send out to our poll workers,
Mm-hmm.
so that we know that we're poll protectors for the sanctity of
Yeah.
the polls. That's an idea. Usually the Democratic poll workers usually get a t-shirt if you're a volunteer, but maybe we could design it special this year and get a fundraiser going.
Mm.
And there's usually people that will donate to causes like this that are very willing to help. And we could get the enthusiasm going, send out a t-shirt that seals a commitment and give it a name, and maybe, you know, going on the superhero concept. And, you know, we can think on it a little bit, but usually younger people are more motivated if you give them something. So they get a t-shirt for the 2020 election. And, you know, we can throw it around a little more, maybe a baseball cap or t-shirt, or theme it even.
The thing is, I mean, I think those are great ideas. I think it could work at the local level, but at the national level, when we have to scale in all these battleground states, you know, like, you know, about 18 states, right?
Well, maybe
And yeah,
brand the campaign then. What about if we
yeah,
brand the campaign, or we go off of what we're kind of already doing and brand the concept,
right.
so they're part of the concept.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is this is gonna be costly, you know, because we have to train people. We're talking tens of thousands of people, right? Um, and we have to train them, and we don't have a lot of time, you know, and I also think we need to make sure that we try to recruit lawyers
Mm-hmm.
and election judges, and so it's gonna it's a massive project, and I think it's really gonna require deep pockets to kind of make sure we can scale up in time to staff all these polling stations around the country, you know, and make sure that they're trained, because if they can't just show up, like they actually have to be willing to, they have to know the process and be willing to get into real standoffs with people, because I've seen that happen at polling stations where there are real arguments about provisional ballots. I was a volunteer at a polling station in Annandale, Virginia, where this happened, and I got into a fierce argument with the Republican volunteer about provisional ballots. And so it's not easy. I mean, you really have to kind of train people how to do this, because it could get really ugly and nasty. And again, they have to understand the laws of each county.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, I think we have to really mobilize like on a big scale, like work with organizations, figure out who's doing this. I think we need to have people with deep pockets get involved in it to make sure that we can recruit tens of thousands of people. And I mean, could be that it's already going on, but I don't know of it.
Hmm.
I don't know anyone doing this kind of recruitment on a big scale, and the Republicans are doing it for sure. And they have been doing it. They've been working on this. They had an organization called True the Vote that would go around intimidating voters at polling stations, and I filmed that stuff. And so they have a lot of experience with voter intimidation at polling stations. And anyway, so those are my concerns. Like I feel like this is a gigantic
This is
issue.
gigantic. This is a
Yeah,
gigantic issue. I think
yeah.
that we should take this on, Annabelle. I think we
Mm-hmm.
need that. I think that it's a sprint, and let's work to find what's being done over the next couple days and
Mm-hmm.
see who we can find to help us. And
Yeah.
let's start reaching out to
Mm-hmm.
folks
Mm-hmm.
and let's come back together.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm relieved to hear that you're interested in taking it on, because I've been just I've been really fretting over this. I
You know
also
what? I'm going to tell you the truth. Kamala
yeah.
Harris was always, you know what? The Maternal Cares Act is very, very important to me. And she won my heart with that. Maternal health is very, very important to me. And ever since reading that, I've been following her very closely. And could not be more thrilled that she's on the ticket. And I want to see them sworn into this White House, and I will fight till they are sworn in. And I will do what it takes. And I think that this is what we need to do. And so let's do it.
Yeah, I just want to go over this really quickly with you as well. Like the idea of everyone, especially in battleground states, reaching out to 100 voters. I've been recruiting more people in battleground states,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
people are doing it. Like they are like, oh, okay, I want to get started. And so people are doing it, and so we put together a little description of what it is. We had created a name, 100 Voters Project. You and your friends can save America, and describing that, like people just reaching out to people in their network and helping them vote. Right? We could reach thousands of voters this way, and we put together some resources for volunteers. We're going to do some training on how to talk to voters, how to create social media, how to do self-care, how to spot disinformation and counter it. We're going to be spending a lot of time on dealing with disinformation. And in fact, tomorrow, Heather, at 4 p.m. on Talk on Main Street, I'm going to be interviewing this woman who's going to help us. Every week, she's going to come and talk to us about some disinformation campaign.
Wonderful.
I know, I'm so excited. I'm
That.
so excited. Yeah. So anyway, so I'm gonna be working on this, and I'm so happy you and Caitlin are all in. It makes
Yeah.
me feel great. And yeah, I think whatever happens, I think we're gonna create a great community of people who stand together, we support each other, and be very strategic about what we do in this election.
Right.
Yeah, that's my hope. But thank you so much for talking to me so late at night.
You've been listening to Conversations About a Way Forward from Count Me In to Win and the Talk on Main Street. To learn more, find us on Facebook at The Talk on Main Street.